Coming up, we take a look at leaping forward into next year's draft class, where, of course, Cooper Flagg will be the number one pick. And, of course, the Brooklyn Nets will be able to get him there. What is the archetype of player that he will be at the NBA level? Why should fans be so excited? And is there a version where we need a secondary option? We dive into it all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbeck. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. And also, Doug, it's time to talk a little bit about next year's draft class. All throughout this week, we're going to be talking about the top picks that are there, from obviously Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, right? We're going to break down all of the players that everyone is happy to get, though Cooper Flagg, along with Dylan Harper as well, two local products out of Rutgers, is the eye of every Nets fan's mind. But trying to get a sense of where these players are going to be coming in, some interesting maybe comps to NBA current players, and what to expect if the Nets get a player like that, which would be considered in Cooper Flagg a generational talent.
Yeah, it's the whole reason you do it. I mean, it's the whole reason we're doing draft content a year before the draft with the Nets going into the season, because this is the point of the whole season, right? The point of the whole season is you have a chance to land a possible generational talent. And at worst, probably the next four guys, all would, or maybe even five guys, would have gone number one in this year's draft class if they just had, reclassified or just been eligible. And so this is the whole point. We're setting up for a year of pain on the actual basketball court, with the hope that at the end of the tunnel here, that there's going to be a guy or multiple guys that you can think about building a long-term sustainable franchise on the backup. And obviously Cooper Flagg is the big prize. And so when the Knicks come along and offer all the picks for Mikal Bridges, and Houston offers the pick swaps back, or the picks back, all of a sudden you're like, hey, we have a chance to reset things in like the best way possible. And Cooper Flagg has a guy people in NBA circles have been talking about for years now. I mean, like, this is not just this, similar to Wembanyama. This is a guy that just didn't come around that we're trying to figure out if he's gonna be number one pick. Like 3 or 4 years ago, people were like, we already know who the number one pick in the 2025 draft is. It's Cooper Flagg. Let's just see how we can get there.
Yeah, 100%. That's what makes it, I mean, on paper, exciting, because you've taken all the right steps, including having a roster that has an over-under of 19.5 wins this upcoming season to be in a position to do so. Over on Tankathon right now, the Nets, if everyone's interested, they're locked in there at that number one spot. They also, of course, later in the first round are currently projected to have the 24th, 25th, and 28th overall pick coming from the Bucks, the Knicks, and the Oklahoma City Thunder, respectively. But it will all come down to this top pick and hopefully getting the number one overall, and then getting a player like Cooper Flagg. When we turn our attention to him specifically, the one thing I'll just say from a high level, which happens in every draft class, speculating on guys that have young tape and have teenage tape, but also then have to do the next steps, right? The projection forward of even a generational talent, does it still give you any now go prove it for the one college year, like just confirm all of the hype and all of the excitement? Because there is a little bit of that for me, because we have seen some guys be draft busts, never typically generational talents. Would have been shocked if Wembanyama turned out to not pan out at the NBA level, but it does happen. So is there anything about his game that you feel like, hey, gonna need to prove X, Y, or Z before we can be fully committed to Cooper Flagg being the Brooklyn Nets savior?
Usually when you go into a college season, you're waiting to see sort of how it translates. You've been dominating on, sort of the high school AAU circuit for a long time. You're still playing high energy, high quality talent, except that Cooper Flagg did one thing slightly different, got a little lucky with timing here, where he was able to scrimmage against the USA team leading into the Olympics, and he looked totally fine. Like, especially defensively, where he was going up against Anthony Davis, he looked not really intimidated at all. Like, sometimes it's kind of hard to put a number on like sort of the intensity and just sort of, overall chutzpah, I guess you would say, a player has. He had it. He did not look afraid at all. He had some highlight plays defensively, and then he had one ball that was blocked, and he just got it and just took it right back at literally maybe the best defender in all of basketball in AD. Yeah. And when you can do that, even in a short, limited sample tape, on top of all the other tape that we have, which is him just going absolutely ham on most of the other guys in his draft class and below, that's the part where I don't like to put too much stock in just snippets. Right. But when the snippet has crazy context like this on top of the hype machine that's already rolling for this guy, it was just solidified. It's like, okay, never mind, we're good. It's good to go. They need to. This is the guy that you want because he has all the tangibles and intangibles. It would seem.
Well, by the way, it's a little bit of attitude, a little bit of swagger. You mentioned chutzpah before. There are these clips of him breaking down his sessions against Team USA. And when you hear a player at his age, who obviously has all the confidence in the world, but when you hear him say, and then I get onto the switch on the outside and it's AD, so I give him a little shimmy, break him down a touch, and then, and then talk about the rest of the play. Yeah. To have the confidence to talk about, you say an established NBA player and go, so I saw him in front of me. I figure I'll take him off the dribble, let him know what's what. Dropped a pass off here, didn't quite work out, got a quick rebound, went to the baseline. I also think the way that he talks about the game from a confidence standpoint and also from an IQ standpoint, because that's probably the marriage of when we talk about generational talents. It's the raw natural talent has to be there, but then the fundamental understanding of my defensive game is absolutely elite right now. The offensive game is already in a good spot, but will continue to evolve as he gets to the NBA level. And to be able to see him go up against some of the best ever in the game and still come out of it looking like proved a few things, showed a few things, and probably learned a few things as well, was a really good sign for him this early on as he prepares to go into the draft next season. The only other thing that I would mention here before we get into some NBA comps and also a player in Hugo Gonzalez that's a little bit further down the Tankathon draft board right now, but still offers more tremendous value in this very deep draft class, is the last thing is knock on every piece of wood you can find. Let's talk about you next year when you've had a totally healthy season and nothing's gone wrong. That's always the thing that can derail any level of hype around a particular play. And I don't say that to bring anything down, but it happens. And so I just want to see him go from being a lean high school player, put on more weight, put on more frame, develop some skill sets, and then get to the NBA. If you could wrap him up right now, the Nets would commit to drafting him today in next year's draft class if they could guarantee that he'd come in a little bit bigger and no worse for wear playing a year in college.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is kind of where we stand with him, too. Again, I think there's very few questions to answer on him. I don't think, except for, like you said, make it all the way healthy, right? Make it all the way to the finish line and just be healthy. There are some interesting comps. I do want to say one thing about, the differences in some of these generational talents and just overall sort of, what came up, what comes up with them leading into the draft. One guy who I think it's maybe a good comp in terms of sort of overall attitude and professionalism, maybe, and maybe a guy who hasn't exuded the same thing and sort of how the things have been different along the way. We'll get into that here in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at Game Time. Look, if you're going to a sports event, you're going to the theater, you're going to a comedy show, you want to see a concert, you want to get tickets, you want to make the ticket buying experience as easy as possible. Game Time's got a new feature called Game Time Picks. Makes getting tickets for your favorite live events that much easier. It filters out the fluff. I'll show you only the incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to waste time searching around through thousands of tickets. And believe me, that sometimes those marketplaces can get tough to manage. Not over at Game Time. Game Time's got curated deals. It's going to make it easy to find the best prices and great seats. They got the super deals. They got seat views before you buy, so you're not going to get surprised when you actually sit down in your seat. Lowest price guaranteed, event cancellation protection, job loss protection. It's all there for you over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA over at Game Time for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time.
As we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, taking a look at Cooper Flagg, the savior, coming to Brooklyn, going to make everything all right for the entire Nets organization and also the fan base in one fell swoop. You mentioned there, as we talk about NBA comparisons, I'm assuming, because this is a care of Bleacher Report's Jonathan Wasserman, who came out with his list. He did this. I think he does almost every single year for the draft classes. But in talking about Cooper Flagg, one of the ones that has been associated with him for a while now because of shot blocking instincts, defensive versatility, that length, is Andrei Kirilenko. I'm assuming that when you talk professionalism and attitude, he's the guy that you love to see that type of comp for those type of traits.
Yeah, another guy that he's got comp to is like Kevin Garnett too, which is another one who was just like a total psycho in a competitive
in a
way,
great way,
and
in the most
like
complimentary way.
Oh, in the way that you want for your number one draft pick, right? Like
Yeah,
these guys that are just ultra focused. He's got sort of the frame that is similar to him. He can be on ball, and so. But if you look at sort of like I don't want to call it a new age of NBA talent because there's always been guys who have been really committed to the craft. But these guys who have been along the way sort of been prepared to be in the spot that they're going to be, right? Like you get like Cooper Flagg has been the number one pick in the NBA draft for 4 years now or something like that. Right. 3 years now. He's been talked about in that way. And you can tell by the way he carries himself and the way he talks about the game that in addition to the great stuff on the court, which we'll talk about, like he's prepared. It's almost like he's already prepared. It's not too dissimilar to me from what you saw from Wembanyama going in, which was like, hey, I understand the assignment. This is what it is. I've been prepared. This is my only focus is this thing. And I get we're going to talk about Banchero. Banchero, he wasn't like the consensus number one pick in the same way because there was like Chet Holmgren and who's the other guy that was in that group? Oh, shoot. I'll get that in a second. Who was 1, 2, 3? It was Holmgren, Banchero, and someone else. But I'm blanking. But anyway, these guys who exude professionalism. And then you kind of get a guy like Zion Williamson, right? Who's like all athleticism. And it hasn't really translated maybe all the time in the work ethic, right? Like he's had trouble maintaining. So sort of there's just been talk about like, how he's been able to maintain his weight over the years. And he was there. He was a consensus number one pick on talent, but
Jabari Smith. I did it.
What's that? Oh, yeah. Sorry, Jabari Smith. There was he's there on talent consensus, but I don't know if what leading in had the same sort of like talking points around like the commitment to like understanding every little detail about what it's going to take to be the number one pick. And I think when you see that from Cooper Flagg early, especially the way that he was able to like really think and synthesize things that were happening against some of these NBA guys outside of just like, hey, I got a 7-foot blank wingspan and I can move on the ball and stuff. Yeah. I think that that's even more encouraging when you're bringing in this guys. And I think that like, as we get further and further along into the NBA and how popular it is, you're just going to see more and more of these guys who are just ultra professionals before they even step on the court in the NBA. Yeah. It helps to have the licensing deals at the college level to be already getting paid and kind of understand like the money aspect of this stuff early. But I think Cooper Flagg is just part of that generation of guys who already it kind of seems like he already gets it.
Yeah, no, and it's a really good point to bring up. Just that idea of, well, if you know for 4 years ahead of time that is where you are going, you are headed to the number one overall pick in the NBA draft, and you have the right people around you in terms of agents, in terms of even personal, your personal circle around you, that you're preparing yourself in the way that by the time you get to that stage, it won't be a shock value. It won't be what's the growth going to look like once you get there, or is he going to be capable of it? It should mostly be like, yep, this is every single box I checked along the way to make sure that I was capable of doing it. And we talk a little bit about his game, but the one thing you mentioned Banchero there, just as because I thought he's not talked about the same way as you mentioned. But if the idea is you can have a player and label it the way you want with Cooper Flagg's skill set, whether it be more defensive value early, etc. But the idea that you can have a player that would come in like at 20 years old, Banchero did, and be a 20-point scorer right out the gate, and then even more importantly, year over year from year 1 to year 2, improve in basically every key statistical category on his resume. Better three-point shooting, like a massive leap in that regard. Better at the free throw line, stay consistent while picking up his assists, picking up his rebounds. Like if every category, and being rookie of the year, and then having some accolades on your ledger as well, I think from a success standpoint, Banchero is a good comp for what you expect and want to see from Cooper Flagg in year one. Confirmation of things being where they need to be, and then also setting the table for where you can elevate and grow. But I would obviously all argue that walking in the door, Flagg should be better. Should be better than most recent rookies outside of Wembanyama. You could make the argument when he steps on the court in the 2025 season.
I mean, basically the best thing you can have in the NBA is like huge on ball guys, right?
Yeah.
Because it unlocks almost everything for you. Like if you have a 6'9" to 7 foot plus guy who can get on the ball, run inverted pick and roll, right? Like be able to do some of this stuff. It just taxes defenses to the point of like there's kind of no solution to it, right? Like we talk a lot on the podcast about how basketball is incredibly complex, and then at the same time, if you draw all the way down to it, it's pretty
Very
easy,
simple.
right? It's
Right.
it's pretty easy at a certain level. We can draw all the things up in the world, and you can have all the different schemes, and it's important to have those things. If you have a 7 foot tall wing, sort of on ball creator who can stretch out beyond the 3-point line and attack, lesser defenders off the dribble, run, like I said, different forms of pick and roll. Good luck. Like you can't really, it's really hard to defensively scheme against that as soon as you have even 4 other competent NBA guys on the court with you. And so that's the kind of versatility these guys provide, is that when you have Banchero's like this, Wembanyama's like this, guys who just are outside of the mold of 99.9% of other basketball players, they become close to impossible to defend. You can do it, but it requires making tough decisions on that end because you're going to have to give something else up. We're going to see the opposite this year with the Nets, where defenses don't need to give anything up and they're just able to stop them because there's nothing on offense that the team can do. No problem.
Yeah.
But just go out and watch these every big wing creator, every guy that stands this big and can get on the ball. It's why the post isn't a thing anymore. Maybe you want to get you want to get a low man in the post and beat them that way. Go for it. But other than that, good luck defending these guys on the perimeter when you start getting into like just really, really disadvantageous defensive situations. And Cooper Flagg just represents the kind of guy that can punish just about any scheme.
And I think too, because I agree with everything you're saying. And if we start to, because there's one other element to this in terms of being a wing player in that mold that matters greatly to the Brooklyn Nets. But if we're also just thinking about what his skill set is walking in the door and everything it's going to expand into, if you believe that the Brooklyn Nets currently on their roster have Cam Thomas and Noah Clowney and Nicholas Claxton, if those are 3 guys that you believe are at least in this immediate core of the team beyond anybody else, even Jalen Wilson, etc., then you have to love the fact that you're going to insert finally a version of a high-level defensive player. And Noah Clowney, I think, is a part of that too. But you think about Clowney being more up to the 4, and you think about Cooper Flagg maybe playing in at the 3. And if you can talk about bringing that type of skill set and ball handling and the defensive value, I always relate this back to the idea of, boy, if you want Cam Thomas to explode, surround him with a bunch of size, a bunch of versatility, and a bunch of kind of dominant defensive traits, and then let him take care of all the offensive stuff. Like, I think there is that fit kind of value, which is being dismissive of generational talent. Like, fit doesn't really matter when you're the skill set of Cooper Flagg, but how does everyone fit along with him? There's some nice things there to think about when you try to build together a team that needs offensive value, but also needs someone that can play out of a position on the wing, which historically the Brooklyn Nets never have that guy. They don't have, Cam Johnson is not the guy that's going to be ultra creative out of the wing. Jalen Wilson is not the guy that's going to do those things for you. Dorian Finney-Smith, like all these players, that's only in the last year and a half, let alone if you go back before the Kevin Durant era of this team.
Well, I was going to say they had that guy in Kevin Durant. Like Kevin Durant was that guy. Like he was that guy. And guess
exactly,
what? When you have a 7 foot tall on ball creator, you become who can shoot as good as any player that's ever played.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? You have a top 10 all-time guy, right? Like, and that's what Kevin Durant was. Or is.
Right. And so outside of having him and obviously losing him, this is what we'll get into here in a second, how we always talked about where the Nets sometimes a half a step behind the trends of the NBA and where the game was going. Now, when you don't have high first-round draft picks, it's hard to fix being behind on the times and get those players. But Cooper Flagg represents like where the league is now and what type of player and mold of player matters now, something that outside of Kevin Durant, the Brooklyn Nets have lacked on their roster. And you can really start to think about the massive impact that he can have. Coming up next, we'll break that down a little bit further on how good he could be in that role at the NBA level. And then also mention maybe another guy who could have, as Doug mentioned at the top, been a number 1 pick in this past year's draft class based on how he projects the NBA as well. We'll get into that coming up next.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Look, we're always talking about FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. They got a little something different for you coming up here through football season, now through September 22nd. So you get a little less than a month. All FanDuel customers can bet $5. You get a 3-week free trial of the NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube or YouTube TV. And with YouTube TV base plan, you're going to be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. You'll love to hear that when we're all spread out through the country. We wanted to just see our favorite teams. YouTube TV plus FanDuel's got you covered. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. We all got that. You can cancel anytime. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, so as we close out today's Locked On Nets episode, we remind you that we always thank you for making the Locked On Nets podcast your first listen of the day, but why not make Locked On NBA podcast your second listen? There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in, of course, 30 minutes or less, just like a pizza. No one keeps you as informed or entertained as Locked On NBA, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and you know it's your team, and it's every single day. Before we turn our attention over to Hugo Gonzalez, just because when we're in these very deep draft classes all week long, we're going to do the same thing, talk about guys that are 1, that are 2, that are 3, and then also offer guys that are 5, 6, 7, 8, because the Nets at least need to live somewhat in that world, and we'll also have coverage of the back end of the first round and what the Nets can do there. What is your favorite component of Cooper Flagg's game right now walking in the door? Let's close out on Cooper Flagg with that, if you have one.
Oh, yeah. Like, sorry. What's his favorite? Like, what's the best one? I mean,
like
the best thing
attribute. Yeah. Like, what do you
it
like
just goes back to what I was saying before, is that like when you have guys like this that can get on the ball and are this dynamic at this size, it's just taxes. It's the way to unlock everything else. And real quick too, just as you were saying defensively before, Cam Thomas, we'll see what the long-term prospects for him. I hope he stays. You can get away with being lesser defensively if you just have everything else great behind you. Right. I'm not comparing Cam to Steph Curry at all here, but I will say Curry, diminutive, slight, can kind of get hunted on defense. The Warriors were able to win mostly because they hit a lot of threes, but 2 behind him, it was like Draymond Green, Andre Iguodala, Klay Thompson, right? Like when you have 3 amazing defenders behind you, like all NBA style, NBA, all defensive NBA kind of guys, it makes up for a lot. Right.
Yeah,
and so not to just make a comp here, but I'm just saying that like you can get away with the lack of defense at times if everyone else is way above their pay grade. We can get a Hugo Gonzalez, but the Cooper Flagg thing, the fact that the defense is already dialed in at the NBA level means that like the floor is so high anyway.
Yeah, and that crystallizes my point about around a Cam Thomas or a Cam Thomas-like player, right? If you get a pure scorer in there and you feel like you don't want to have to worry about that other end of the floor, stack the deck. And using Steph Curry and the Warriors model is a good example of that. The other way, it will use just Tankathon here for the sake of argument, is looking at the top board here right now and where players stand as you work your way through the top 10. Obviously, right now it's Cooper Flagg. They currently have Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, Traore out of France is going to be there in the 4 spot. Then you have Edgecombe out of BU, and then you get to Hugo Gonzalez, international player who played in Real Madrid. And this is a really good example of how deep this draft class is, because we're talking about generational talent in Cooper Flagg, but then you go watch Hugo Gonzalez and you think, oh, I'm not saying I don't want Cooper Flagg, but I'm also saying teams are going to get amazing prospect talent even as you get midway through the top of the draft, which is funny when we think about this past draft class where a lot of teams were like, anybody want it? Does anybody want the pick? Well, we will give this thing away based on the prospects. So the Nets have spiked in terms of the year that they're going to have this type of opportunity.
Yeah, and look, if they finish with the worst pick in the draft and the things don't change, right? Like they're going to have that top 5 pick no matter what. And I still think they're a heavy favorite to have the worst thing. But again, these draft boards move over the course of a year. So it's like this stuff, we're doing it now. It's going to look different through, risers, fallers, all the other thing. When you look at Hugo Gonzalez with the Real Madrid, like this guy, I'm not saying he would have been the number 1 pick, but the athleticism jumps so far off the screen. He's super young, right? He's playing the Liga, but if you watch him play again, like lower at sort of not lower levels, but like even like the U18 stuff, he can absolutely fly. He gets above the rim. He has good court vision. Mm-hmm. He would have been a guy that teams at 6'6", 6'7", teams definitely would have talked with a big wingspan. Teams definitely would have talked themselves into him as a pretty high pick this year, if not number 1 overall, because when you can combine this size with the athleticism, you start to really dream on. You're like, oh, if we can just get the shooting, then we're talking about a dude who can really pop. And when you looked at this past draft class, everyone had such a major flaw that it was just like hard. You had to tell yourself some real stories, whether Reza Shea or Sar or even Reed Shepard, who looks awesome, but he's so small, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, all these guys just had built-in flaws that maybe weren't correctable. Hugo Gonzalez actually wouldn't have had any of those, except for the shooting isn't amazing, but it's not horrible, right?
No, and
37%
that's
from
always
beyond the arc.
yeah, and that's usually something you talk about with players coming in. It's like, and if you can project. I mean, how many times do we talk about a prospect that you say, well, if the shot looks good at the college level or internationally from beyond the arc, hey, it's a good motion, everything makes sense, free throw percentage is there, great. He'll get there, and that's the last piece to this puzzle, and that's what it would be for Hugo Gonzalez, only shooting 23% from beyond the arc when we go back to last season playing internationally, say for Real Madrid. So there's something there for sure that he needs to improve on. But I think you're right. Like baseline skill set and baseline projection easily could have talked yourself into taking him first in the draft last year just because you felt like you had less question marks and more answers. And that's relative to the draft class that it was. The Nets fall out of the top 3 or number 1 pick, and they fall to 3. And we'll watch Hugo Gonzalez and all these guys over the upcoming season. Are you comfortable taking him and saying this player is someone that we can, not generationally like Cooper Flagg, but we can still build around him? Because when you watch his tape, you at least say, in the same way we mentioned Cooper Flagg being able to unlock and make things easier for everybody, for the Brooklyn Nets, a player like this playing out on the wing, it does all the same, at least type of things that you lack right now. Bring in a player that can open up the offensive system and then also help you defensively as well, which again is as much an indictment about what the Nets' current roster is as anything else, but you need more and more players like this.
I mean, it would be a big disappointment to go from Cooper Flagg to Hugo Gonzalez, like no
100%.
doubt about it, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I don't want to set anyone
I'm
up
not saying
for.
we don't want to put the blindfold on and just throw the dart at donkey tail and say we'll take anybody that we can get in the top. There is a hierarchy.
And we're going to talk about these other guys like Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, VJ. Like, we're going to talk about these other guys this week. So it would be a massive downgrade. Other years we would have been super excited to, I think about a guy like this because, again, the athleticism definitely jumps off the page. He has good court vision. You can't manufacture size, and to have size out of like a sort of like an on-ball guard type, then you can start to feel really, really good about it. Only by comparison, I would say it'd be disappointment. But again, in other years, this guy I think would have been this draft class is awesome. And I think that other years we would have we'd already be talking about him as a higher overall prospect. He just happens to fall in with a group of guys who all would have been number 1 in other seasons.
Right. Spread them out.
And that's just
spread them out across a few years, and we're talking about consensus number 1s in their own draft classes. Yeah.
Of course. So I think he has stuff that already translates to the NBA level, specifically the athleticism, specifically the vision, specifically just the overall speed. But the shot doesn't look horrible
with the ball. Like
the shot doesn't look horrible either. He just didn't shoot well, and he's just so young. So I think, again, guy you could talk yourself into. I'm not sure where he ends up landing. I could see him probably jump. Let's say the shooting comes around a little bit this year. He could definitely jump. Like he could go higher, I think, than 5 or 6 when it's all said and done.
And that's right now, as we sit here, you mentioned just about age. Obviously, Cooper Flagg is coming in 18. He's still not 19 years old yet. There's 2 other in the current top 10, including Ace Bailey, who's about to be 19 as well. Everybody else is sub 20. No one, even Edgecombe, is just about to be 20 years old. So all the youth at the top of the draft there is something worth watching. And when you look down through this, we'll probably start to think about it as we're talking at the end of August about next year's draft class. Which players behind, hopefully Cooper Flagg, behind Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, guys you think that are cemented, who are guys that go from mid-teens and maybe try to push up into the full lottery or up into the top 10. There's going to be some fluctuation here, which is what for the first time, if you're Doug and I, and if you are a Nets fan, is keeping an eye on the NBA draft, keeping an eye on the college season, like keeping an eye on what some of these players are doing in the background throughout the year will be something we give attention to like we normally haven't, because the Nets have never had a reason to, and the draft classes have never been deep enough when they've had enough of these picks. They have, but quick footnote here. They could have 4 new players. and at least three, maybe 3 new starters on the team when you fast forward a year after they come out of this deep first round draft class. So there's just so much of this to try to examine and look at a minimum. Getting Cooper Flagg would be the, hey, thanks so much. Well, thanks so much for the value. We'll see you when we come up later in the first round. So it's an exciting time to look at these prospects in that way for Brooklyn.
We're going to cover some more of these guys this week as we start to take a year ahead look at the NBA draft. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube as well.
Mediocrity knows nothing higher than itself, but talent instantly recognizes genius. Why that is Artie Conan Doyle.
One of the all-time great poets. All right, P. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.